The days after Luke's wedding felt like trudging through a fog. Heavy, disorienting, and endless. I threw myself into work at the shop, clinging to the comfort of routine. The familiar rhythm of arranging bouquets and tending to plants became my anchor, each blossom an attempt to bring order to the chaos inside me. But no matter how perfectly I balanced the colors or how much time I spent buried in the scent of roses and lavender, the ache clung to me, wrapping itself around my heart like ivy choking a tree. Nights were the hardest. I'd collapse into bed exhausted, only for my mind to replay moments I wished I could forget. Luke's laugh echoing in my ears, the way he'd glance at me like I was his whole world, and then the image of him walking down the aisle with someone else. The hollow silence of my apartment seemed to mock me, amplifying every doubt and regret until it felt like I couldn't breathe. One particularly cold morning, as I arrived at the shop, I found myself almost dreading the day ahead. The bitter wind bit at my cheeks as I fumbled with the keys, my fingers stiff from the chill. As I opened the door, a gust of wind swept through the street, catching the carefully arranged display of chrysanthemums and lilies I had set up the previous evening. I watched in dismay as the petals scattered across the pavement, their delicate beauty crushed underfoot by passers-by. It felt like a metaphor for my life. No matter how much care I poured into something, the world seemed determined to undo it. Frustration bubbled in me, and I dropped to my knees, gathering the broken stems and bruised petals with trembling hands. The sharp chill of the ground seeped through my jeans, but I didn't care. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, a mix of anger and helplessness. "Need a hand." The voice startled me, soft yet steady, and I looked up to find a man crouched beside me. His hair was tousled, the wind teasing it into disarray, and his smile carried a warmth that stood out against the cold. For a moment, I just stared at him, caught off guard by his presence. Thanks," I mumbled, brushing the dirt and petals off my palms as he reached for the fallen flowers. He handed me a small bundle of salvaged blooms, his fingers brushing mine briefly. "You spend all this time making them look perfect, and then nature comes along and does its thing," he said with a slight chuckle. Something about the way he said it, half amused, half resigned, struck a chord. I managed a small laugh, though it came out more bitter than I intended. "Story of my life," I murmured. "Seems like we've got that in common," he replied lightly, his gaze shifting from me to the shop window behind us. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, and he followed suit, holding the last of the flowers in his hand. "I'm Adrian," he said, extending his free hand. "Cal," I replied, shaking his hand. His palm was rough, calloused in a way that spoke of hard work. It reminded me of Luke's hands, but I quickly pushed the thought away. Adrian's eyes lingered on the display in the window, now slightly disheveled from the wind. "That's a beautiful arrangement," he said, nodding toward it. "You've got a real eye for this." "Thanks," I said, a little caught off guard. Compliments about my work weren't uncommon, but something about his tone felt different. More personal, like he truly meant it. The wind picked up again, tugging at our clothes and sending another stray petal skittering across the pavement. For a moment, we stood in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but carried an unspoken weight, as if both of us were searching for the right words to say. "You should come inside," I said suddenly, the invitation slipping out before I could second-guess it. His presence, though unexpected, felt like a break in the monotony, a glimpse of something I hadn't realized I needed. He smiled again, that same soft, easy expression, and nodded. "I'd like that." As we stepped into the warmth of the shop, I felt something shift. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but it was there. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just surviving the day. I was present. And as Adrian glanced around the shop with genuine interest, I couldn't help but wonder if life had just thrown me a second chance at something I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. Adrian became a regular fixture in my life after that first encounter. He'd stop by the shop at odd times, sometimes for a bouquet, sometimes just to chat. I never quite knew when to expect him, but somehow, he always seemed to show up when I needed a distraction most. He talked about his work as a landscape architect with a kind of fervor that was impossible to fake. His eyes would light up when he described turning overgrown, neglected spaces into something vibrant and alive, his hands moving in animated gestures as if he were sketching the changes in the air. His enthusiasm was infectious, and even though I was still wading through the heaviness of my grief, I found myself leaning into his stories, letting them pull me out of my own head for a while. At first, I didn't know what to make of him. I wasn't used to people who gave so freely of themselves without expecting something in return. I was still grieving, still holding tight to the pain of losing Luke, as if letting it go would mean losing him all over again. But Adrian didn't push. He didn't ask for more than I could give. He just showed up, steady and patient, like sunlight quietly filtering through a window, warming the room without demanding to be noticed. One evening, after I'd locked the doors for the day, Adrian lingered. He was perched on the edge of the counter, a cup of coffee in his hands, the scent mingling with the earthy aroma of the shop. The glow of the setting sun filtered through the glass. "I'm working on this project," he began, his tone lighter than usual but tinged with the undercurrent of excitement that always crept in when he talked about his work. "It's a run-down park on the edge of town. You should see it. Overgrown grass, broken benches, graffiti everywhere. It's a complete mess." I glanced at him, expecting a punchline, but his expression was earnest. "But you know what?" he continued, leaning back in the chair he'd claimed as his own. "I can see the potential. Beneath all that neglect, there's beauty waiting to be uncovered." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if he was still talking about the park or something else entirely. "You should come check it out," he said, his voice softening. "I think you'd appreciate it." I hesitated, my hands fiddling with a stray ribbon from the counter. The idea of stepping out of my carefully constructed routine felt foreign, even daunting. But there was something in the way he said it, like he was offering me a glimpse into his world, inviting me to see something that mattered to him. "Okay," I said finally, the word slipping out before I could second-guess it. Adrian's face broke into a smile. Not the polite kind people give out of obligation, but one of those rare, genuine smiles that reach the eyes. "You won't regret it," he said, his tone filled with a confidence I couldn't quite share yet. As he sipped his coffee, talking about his plans for the park, I found myself studying him. The way his fingers tapped against the cup when he was thinking, the way his brows furrowed when he was searching for the right words. It struck me how different he was from anyone I'd ever known. He wasn't trying to fix me or save me. He was just there, present in a way that felt rare and oddly comforting. For the first time in months, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or curiosity. Whatever it was, it made me wonder if I could learn to see the potential in the mess of my own life the way Adrian saw it in that park. The park was a wreck. Weeds had overtaken everything, and the fountain in the center was cracked and dry. But as Adrian pointed out his plans, where the flower beds would go, how he'd restore the pathways, I felt something stir in me. "This is going to be beautiful," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. "I hope so," Adrian replied, looking at me instead of the park. His gaze lingered a moment too long, and I felt my heart stumble in my chest. I looked away quickly. "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted. "That's okay," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to be. I just like spending time with you." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't anything I needed to respond to or reciprocate. It was just honest. Over the next few months, the park became our project. We spent weekends clearing debris, planting flowers, and bringing the place back to life. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized I was starting to heal. Adrian didn't try to fill the empty spaces Luke had left behind. Instead, he helped me find the strength to fill them myself. One day, as we planted the final bed of flowers in the park, Adrian paused, wiping the dirt off his hands with a grin that tugged at the corners of his mouth. His face was smudged with soil, his hair tousled by the wind, but there was a softness in his eyes that made the moment feel significant. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful as he gazed at the vibrant blooms before us. "Flowers bloom even in the harshest conditions. They just need the right care. I stopped, my hand still buried in the soil, and looked at him. For months, his presence had been a quiet reassurance, his kindness a steady rhythm in my life. The ache in my chest that had once felt insurmountable now felt lighter, like it was being replaced with something warm and new. I think so, I said. I'm starting to believe that. Ours wasn't a whirlwind romance. There were no grand declarations or sudden moments of clarity. It was slow and grew, like the seeds we'd planted together, nurtured day by day, watered with quiet conversations and shared laughter. Adrian became my safe space, the person I could turn to when the weight of the past threatened to pull me under. He didn't try to erase my grief or compete with my memories of Luke. Instead, he held space for both, understanding that healing wasn't about forgetting but about learning to carry the love you've lost alongside the love you found. We spent more evenings in the park as it transformed under Adrian's careful guidance. What had once been a forgotten, neglected space was now vibrant with life. Flowers swayed in the breeze, benches gleamed with fresh paint, and children's laughter echoed through the trees. It was as if the park mirrored my own journey, each bloom a testament to the growth I hadn't realized was happening inside me. One sunny afternoon, as we sat on one of the newly painted benches, Adrian handed me a small box. My heart skipped, the world momentarily blurring as I met his gaze. "Don't look so worried," he teased, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "It's not what you think." I opened the box to find a single seed inside. "I wanted to give you something that would grow with us," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You told me once that you never thought you'd feel at peace again. But here you are, smiling, laughing, planting gardens. And I don't know if it's the flowers or the company, but I'd like to think I had a hand in it." I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simplicity and beauty of the gesture. "You had more than a hand in it," I said softly, clutching the box. Over the months, that seed became a part of us. We planted it together in the park, a small patch where the sunlight was strongest. Watching it grow became a ritual, a shared reminder of the life we were building, not just in the park but in the quiet, ordinary moments that made up our days. And then, one crisp autumn evening, as we stood beneath the tree that had grown from that seed, Adrian pulled out another box, this time a smaller one. "I thought about doing this somewhere fancy," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "but nothing felt right. This spot, it's ours. It's where we've been growing something together, something I want to nurture for the rest of my life." I stared at him, my breath catching as he sank to one knee. "Cal," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion flickering in his eyes. "You've taught me that love doesn't have to be flashy or loud to be real. It's in the quiet moments, the shared silences, the hands covered in dirt as we plant something beautiful. I want to spend my life building more of that with you. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to still, the sounds of the park fading as tears blurred my vision. My heart swelled, the ache that had lingered for so long finally giving way to something bigger, something brighter. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking as I nodded. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, the cheers of a few park-goers reached us, their applause mixing with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Adrian stood, pulling me into his arms, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt whole. Because love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, patiently, and plants itself in your heart, waiting to grow into something extraordinary.